Testify welcomes you to the book of 2 Samuel. Samuel chapter 1 to 20. 2 Samuel picks up after Saul's death. David surprises everyone by lamenting the death of Saul, the man who tried to murder him. Once again, the author shows David's humility and compassion. He is a man who grieves the death of even his enemies. David goes on to experience a season of success and divine blessing. The Israelite tribes all come to David and ask him to unify the tribes as their king. He accepts, and the first thing he does as king is go to Jerusalem, conquer it, establish it as Israel's capital city, and rename it Zion. From there, David continues to win many battles and expand Israel's territory. David makes Jerusalem the political capital of Israel. He also wanted to make it their religious capital, so he had the Ark of the Covenant moved into the city. David then tells God that if Israel now has a permanent home, God's presence should also have a place to inhabit, so he asks if he can build a new temple for him. However, God says to David, "Thanks for the thought, but actually I'm going to build you a house." He also tells David that his son, Solomon, will build a temple of the Lord in Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Why did David not build the temple? David did not build the temple because God did not allow him to, as he was too busy being a warrior fighting battles for Israel. God also promises David that, from his royal line, there will come a future Messianic king, who will build God's temple on earth and set up an eternal kingdom. He was referring to Christ. The future Messianic kingdom will be how God brings blessing to all nations. This is a high point for David. And sadly, it's right here in the midst of God's blessing that things go terribly wrong. David makes a fatal mistake, not fatal for him, that is, but for a man named Uriah, one of David's prize soldiers. From his rooftop, David sees Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, bathing. David finds her, lays with her, and gets her pregnant. Then, he tries to cover it all up by having Uriah assassinated, and marrying her as soon as she's widowed. When David is confronted by the prophet Nathan, he immediately owns up to what he's done. He's broken and repents, asking God to forgive him. And God does forgive, but he doesn't erase the consequences of David's decisions. As a result of his horrible choices, David's family starts to fall apart, making this section a tragic story much like Saul's. David's sons end up reliving their father's mistakes, but in even worse ways. David's son, Amnon, sexually abuses his sister Tamar, and when their brother Absalom finds out, he has Amnon assassinated. Absalom then hatches a plot to oust his own father from power, and he launches a full-scale rebellion. So, for a second time, David is forced to run from his own home and hide in the wilderness, except this time he's not innocent. The rebellion ends when David's son, Absalom, is murdered, and this breaks David's heart. Once again, he laments over those who tried to kill him. David's last days find him back on his throne, but as a broken man, wounded by the sad consequences of his sin. Samuel chapter 21 to 24. The stories conclude in these chapters and compare the failures of Saul and David, as well as how they hurt others through their bad decisions. David, after all these circumstances, grows weak in battle. In contrast to the stories of the heroic, victorious David, here we see a vulnerable David, who is dependent on others for help. This shows how sin leads to a decline in our victories. Despite Saul and David's evil, God has been at work carrying out his purposes. God opposed their arrogance time after time, and when David humbled himself, he was exalted. By the book's conclusion, the future hope for Israel is looking to the future Messiah, who will bring God's kingdom and blessing to all nations. That brings us to the end of the book of 2 Samuel. Catch us next time.